before. So I wanted to make, okay, we're recording. I wanted to make sure that I have never had an hour to talk about this before, and I don't want to bore you guys. I want to make sure I get to the meat of what you want to know. But I remember sitting in your seat. Okay, not at the seat you're actually in, but I remember being a senior at, I was at a small Bible college. I actually majored in Christian education, but I knew I wanted to use it overseas. And if I have no idea if they gave me a chance to hear from someone who was 20 years ahead of me. I don't remember this, because I was in CE, I wasn't hearing from missionaries and that sort of thing. Even though the school I went to was, it was a Christian and Missionary Alliance school. So there was a lot of people who were planning on going to the mission field, even if that wasn't their major. And some of the things I want to share with you, I really wish someone had said to me when I was that age. So hopefully we'll get to that part. If it means I start diving through the story faster, I will. I also have given a million pictures because they're just going to say way more than anything I could say. So I'm going to be clicking through them really fast. So let me
allow share screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's next to the share and then multiple
Yep.
users.
There you go. It should work.
Okay, it's going to take me just a second.
Yeah.
I'm going to share a second desktop, so it's going to take me a minute to get.
I think she'll be better than Eric was.
I know.
All right, is that good? Can y'all see that all right?
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, y'all should see my setup. It's like I've got this like secondary screen. It's the only way I've figured out how to do all this in the time of COVID. Knowing how to use multiple screens is critical. So anyways, as I said, I'm living in Atlanta with my husband, Joe, and my dog Fitz, who's typically asleep on that chair behind me, but I was terrified he was going to attack a UPS guy while we were on the phone. So I had him sent away. I love HGTV. I love ballroom dancing and coffee with friends. And I'm the founder of and executive director of Canopy Life International. Canopy Life International partners with Canopy Life Academy, which is a boarding school in Coma Hill, Kenya. It's about 45 minutes directly east of Nairobi. And our goal is to empower vulnerable children from rural communities in Kenya to become godly, innovative leaders. Our vision for the future is that these students will create solutions and start businesses that lead others out of poverty. So in our language, it would be holistic leadership development. Okay, we're focused on a very few number of kids, hoping they'll bring great change. Most of our kids come from rural developing communities in Kenya, and where they all face incredible odds in these communities. I have this title, Danger, Fear, and Difficulty, because the definition of bravery is being able to face danger, fear, or difficulty with moral strength and aptitude. And that's really what we're trying to instill in our students. So these students, 36% of the country lives under the international poverty line. Only 50% of the students in Kenya typically make it to high school, even less to college. There is currently a 42% unemployment rate, which means no matter how far they make it in school, there's not many jobs waiting for them. UNICEF has a report out that says 1 in 2 students will witness violence in their home in their childhood, and 30 to 50%, depending on gender, will be victims of violence in their home. So you can see there's just like this whole plethora of issues, some caused by poverty, some caused by generational issues that these students face. It becomes very hard for them to reach their full potential. So at Canopy Life, at this boarding school, we're creating a safe environment where we're cultivating a new kind of leader, one who thinks critically, is innovative, is business savvy, so they can create a job for themselves, emotionally healthy. This is where we get a chance to address the trauma of some of that violence and the poverty they were raised in, and one who's rooted in Christ. And I debated at this point whether to dig deeper into the storytelling of Canopy Life, but I want to fast forward to like the actual story of how it got going, and we can circle back to the school itself if you're interested in that. So our story can be summed up very simply. It's basically God's faithfulness plus the courage of others to trust him in response. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the meme. It's like my plan for my life, and it's like this little stick man on a bicycle, and it just is like this steady incline, and then it's like God's plan for my life, and it's like mountains and hills, and like there's like a lake, and then there's a storm. And that is 100% what my experience has been. And I'm assuming since it was made into a meme that it probably is everybody else's experience as well. But my first trip to Kenya was in 2003. This was just a couple of years after I graduated college. And that God just used that time there. I was there for 6 months. I spent 6 months in the slum of Kibera, and which is I think it's the largest slum in East Africa. And God just used that time to plant a seed for me for Kenya. And then 3 years later, at a worship event, God just very clearly pushed me back to Africa. I was listening to a speaker, and I just couldn't get Kenya out of my head. And that night after the worship session, I went home and I drew a vision in my journal of this home and school and interns and vulnerable children. But I honestly wasn't sure if it was a real idea, because God kind of like gives me flashing lights just to get me to like turn my head. And I had no idea if it was real. But in any case, it pushed me back towards Africa. And in January of the following year, God put me in the path of the 410 Bridge, which is who you're traveling to Kenya with. And I became the director of the Daraja Children's Choir of Africa. And while I was touring with these kids, he just reignited my passion for Kenya, and he grew it into a desire to really bring change there. Just in the very first year that I was touring, God confirmed to me that there was something that he wanted us to build for the children of Kenya, and that vision that I had drawn in my journal a few years before was real. And basically, while we were traveling with the kids and performing with them and leading worship in churches, we were seeing this incredible life change in our students. But we began to encounter, I say we, it's the Kenyan adults and I that traveled together. We began to see issues that we just couldn't address in a 6-month tour, things that were just deeper than what we had time to get to. And so my Kenyan friends and I began to dream about what kind of environment would give us more access to Kenyan students and allow us to go deeper into their lives. And for 4 years, I traveled with the choir, and God was faithful to keep this dream alive and to keep building our trust in him. We had broken down buses. Actually, I think that bottom left corner is the Scranton community. What was it? What's the name of the community? There you Cultural Center. That's right. We actually did several concerts there, and throughout all these tours, we just kept dreaming. My Kenyan friends and I just dreaming that this was something that would be possible. And I'll be honest, being in my mid to late 20s, like 4 years of waiting felt like forever. It just felt like an eternity. But all the while, God was doing stuff that I didn't even realize. He was building our trust in his ability to provide in the midst of every broken down bus, what he provided. And he was, showing us constantly his provision. He was growing the relationship and trust between myself and the Kenyan leadership. And he was growing this really big network of people who loved Kenya and wanted to see good done there. All these host homes, all of these sponsors that I was meeting over time, they loved Kenya and wanted to see good done there. And then in 2011, so about 4 or 5 years in, Kenya unexpectedly denied travel visas to the kids, to the choir, and all the tours were canceled. And really, it seemed like the end of Daraja, which is the name of the choir. But in the midst of it, God really used that closed door. He opened a door for me to move to Kenya. I lived there for almost all of 2012 and do research and development for this dream. So the Kenyan couple that I worked with the closest, Abu and Grace, we visited every school and orphanage that would let us in the door. And we just began developing in this idea and praying and working together to see what God wanted us to build. And when that year was over, I brought the idea back of this holistic school to 410 Bridge, and they loved it. But then that just suddenly unleashed this like year of waiting. And we just kept waiting and waiting. And finally, after years of dreaming with 410 about this vision, we finally agreed that it would be best to part ways, which meant the huge challenge of starting Canopy Life on my own. And even in that, God was so faithful. The reason we parted ways because 410 over time had become very clear in their methodology, and it was different than the methodology that we were hoping to use at the school. And so we were in values aligned, but in model, there wasn't alignment in it anymore. And God used 410 Bridge to help us get started. They were our 501c3 covering for the first couple of years, our NGO partner in Kenya. They created Canopy Life's website, our legal documentation, like our sponsorship program, and in platform, they would create all these things and hand them off to me to manage. And it really allowed Canopy Life to start with excellence, even though for the first 4 years of Canopy Life, it was just me in the US. It looked like we had this massive team because of all the things that they would start and hand off. These pictures here is the very first fundraiser we ever held for Canopy Life, which was in this garden up in North Georgia. And then the very first day we got our 501c3 certificate here in the US. And all those girls there are Fortune Bridge employees at the time, because I didn't even have employees to celebrate to celebrate the win with. It was just my friends in the office. And then finally, after all that time, in January of 2015, that is 8 years and 5 months after God gave me that initial vision in my journal, we opened the doors to Canopy Life. We rented a facility in Nairobi, and we started with these 10 fourth graders as our very first class. And at first, our focus was just the home life and spiritual programs. We wanted to recreate that life transformation we had seen in the choir. And we discovered our kids had experienced these traumas and abuse and neglect. And God was very specific to clarify the journey that we were to spiritually take these kids on, and the need for some intentional emotional healing through trauma counseling. That very first year, our biggest challenge was that we were coming short on funding. We were very young, and we had this very simple donor base that didn't match our need. And in December, I literally reached out through my Facebook page, and I was like, so here's the deeper story. That year, I started dating a guy I had never dated. I was like in my early 30s, and so many people responded so positively. I was like, wow, there's like a lot of people on Facebook who are actually paying attention to what's happening in my life. And I just reached out and said, if all of you gave $50, we could raise $100,000, and I need your help. And that year we raised $120,000, which was just wild. It was just wild. And the next year we added another group of kids. So this was 2016. And we began to realize that we needed to expand the Kenyan curriculum in ways that would engage critical thinking. But again, God provided, and he gave us just the right US instructor who helped create our core teaching strategies, which is, you'll learn this especially, I'm sorry, Bethany, is it Bethany?
Uh-huh.
Okay, you'll notice this a lot. Bethany is like, so much of the teaching in Kenya is lecture. So it's not engaging in a student's development. And so we were trying to teach teachers how to teach the curriculum that's nationally provided, but in a more engaging way. So we have these Canopy Life core teaching strategies, and it really began to shift our educational approach to the kids. So suddenly we're moving from just about the heart and creativity and nurture of the child to like this need for academic critical thinking. And strangely, that same year, we received a huge check from this angel investor. It was like more than we could have ever dreamed. And I was like, I don't know what we're supposed to do with this, but we're just going to tuck it away and trust that God's preparing us for something. Little did we know that in the spring of 2017, we suddenly began to experience really heightened tensions in our neighborhood, and it escalated really quickly. So we were just renting this really large house in a neighborhood where we were holding this boarding school. And basically all these tensions escalated so quickly. The neighborhood seemed intent on kicking us out. They threatened unfounded but really dangerous legal action, which would harm the kids. And we eventually had to release the kids to go home a little bit early for their summer break, and try to figure out what's happening. Years later, we found out that there was just some corruption in the neighborhood, and someone was trying to get their own school started. But at the time, we couldn't figure out where all of these tensions and accusations and corruption was coming from. And even in the midst of, like, for a split second there, I won't even say, that's an exaggeration, for probably 3 to 6 months right there, I wasn't actually sure exactly how we were going to keep the ministry going, because we didn't have a safe place to do this thing that was supposed to literally first step be a safe place. And even in that, God provided. His timing is so perfect. The funds that he had provided in advance gave us this peace that there was a way forward. Right? We had a feeling it was going to probably mean buying our own facility or buying our own land, but we weren't overwhelmed or tempted to quit, because we knew God had known about this in advance and the way that he had provided some of the funding. And that summer, I was able to spend 5 weeks in Kenya praying and trying to figure out how to reopen the school. We did so many property visits. Oh my gosh, real estate hunting in Kenya is wild. That's a whole other story. And it became clear that our next step was that we needed to buy land and build our own place. Even as a side note, that summer, my husband was between careers. And so he was able to be there the whole summer with me. And my brother-in-law and sister were there the whole summer with my brother-in-law's work. So it was like I brought my whole family with me for that like support and prayer. And so with that unexpected gift we had received earlier, we purchased the land that we needed, and we started the process of trying to raise $350,000, which at the time was more than we'd ever raised for buildings and operations. And we found our first partner church. And at the end of that year, I mean, it was wild, girls. We raised about $300,000. It blew my mind about what God had provided. And we began the construction process, which international construction plans are not for the faint of heart. But throughout all of 2018, we were building, and God was so faithful to provide the wisdom, the timing, the endurance, and the patience that we needed to move forward. One crazy story is that summer I came to check on the construction project, and I realized that the communal spaces in the original floor plan were not going to be big enough for the student population. And literally, like, in his faithfulness, we timed it just, if I had come 1 week later, we wouldn't have been able to change the floor plan, because as you can see, it's like cement block, right? And not knowing that we didn't know what we were doing, God just continued to prepare the path forward. And later, while putting in a septic tank, we hit bedrock, which caused our construction budget to take a huge hit. But God was just so faithful, and somehow we completed the project on time and only just slightly over budget. Even at the last moment, we realized that our neighbor, the neighboring property, who had said we could use the water from his well and pipe it in and pay him, we found out last minute that he was planning to cut off water to the campus and extort us for more money. And unexpectedly, we needed a well of our own. And this was like a month and a half before the campus was supposed to open. And I don't know if you guys have heard of Giving Tuesday. It's this national day of raising money for nonprofits, kind of after Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, all the ones. And in one day, we raised the $20,000 that we needed for the well on campus, which was just wild. We had just never experienced anything. I know I'm talking about money a lot, but when you start your own nonprofit, that's really where God shows you his faithfulness through his provision in that way. In addition, Kenya Power never showed up in our first year of construction to connect us to the grid. In fact, they didn't eventually connect us to the grid until 2021. And faithfully, we got this last minute grant that provided the $15,000 we needed for a generator on campus. I mean, it's just wild, just wild. So that was all of 2018. And in January 2019, we opened our new campus. For that whole time, for all those years, I was getting super tired. I was the only US employee. I was the CEO, CFO, CMO, CTO, all the things. And we desperately needed help, but I couldn't figure out how to raise enough money to get there. And again, God once again provided this angel donor who basically gave us 2 years worth of salary for 2 people in order to create a way for God to just continue growing our team. And that summer of 2019, we tripled the number of travelers that we take to Kenya. This is one of our teams with some of our kids at the top of Coma Hill. We began learning how to celebrate with our folks, and we had our first ever gala in which a lot of new people joined in. Giving Tuesday that year, God provided the funds we needed for a truck. And this was December 2019. So we had no idea how badly we were going to need that truck going into 2020. We were just following, the plan that we felt like we were supposed to be following. And that year we also were able to build an academic building. So up until that point, we had been doing everything, house, school, everything in one building. And we were able to get a second building built, which we opened in January of 2020. And I was able to get to Kenya to visit late February 2020. Can you see where I'm going with this? Late February 2020, I got to visit and see the kids and launch the school. Launch the year off. And then right after that was when COVID hit. And you guys know that most nonprofits were really just wildly. When I say that my journey was like this roller coaster of like, as soon as we got ahead of the water, it was like, wham, now you got to go build a building. And then wham, now you got to get a well. And then we had only been on campus a year before COVID hit. And it was really challenging in Kenya because Kenya decided to close schools across the whole country and mandate our students to return to their villages. But I will say our staff responded with such speed. And this, like the weekend or two after it happened, they were like, you know what, I think we should get a we should get ahead of things. And we went out and bought tablets for all the kids. At the time, we only had about 50 kids. And we had been planning on getting them to the communities over the course of a couple of weeks, but one of the staff members was like, you know what, I just think we need to go buy them now and get them out to the communities this weekend. And so this is them sitting out on a booze front porch, packing all these tubs to send to the communities. They went out to the communities, delivered tablets and curriculum to the various students. And the very next day, Nairobi went on lockdown. And for the following 5 months, no one could come or go out of the city. So we wouldn't have been able to get to the students if we hadn't done it that weekend. And that's how we launched digital learning in the villages. So it's wild. If you thought digital learning here was hard, when you've got goat duties and lack of power and all the things, but somehow we kept our kids engaged. We even did counseling sessions via Zoom as best we could. In spite of all the challenges, the kids were making such effort. You know, most of the country was not in school at all for 9 months that year of 2020, but our students stayed engaged. And I was even really proud of them that, you know, all their friends are outside playing. It wasn't like they were on lockdown. All their friends are playing, and they remained really diligent to try to learn and stay engaged as best as they could. Once Nairobi reopened, we were able to send staff out to the villages to help with technical difficulties and figure out why this app wasn't working or that one. And that year, while 17 million students in Kenya were not in school, ours were able to remain focused in learning. And so many of their friends were getting involved in destructive activities, were experiencing mental health issues. I'm trying to remember, but I think the UNICEF report that said globally 17 million kids were going to drop out of school in 2020. Actually, that's not 17. It was something like that. It was close to the number of kids that had been out of school in Kenya due to just things like depression or teenage pregnancy and things like that were going to happen during the course of 2020. And our students were not affected by that. And they returned to residence in October of 2020, which is when we began what we're calling the national catch up. Normally they go to school for 3 months and they're off for a month, but for the last 20 months, they've been going nonstop with only a week break between all of the school terms, so that the nation can catch up and help those 17 million kids that were not in school to get back on track with their school schedule. So in 2021, we saw the advantages of that virtual learning when our 8th graders scored in the top 25% of the nation on their national exam, and some of them were selected to a higher high school. Our long-term vision is to offer high school ourselves, but we're not currently registered as a high school. So when kids hit 9th grade, they go to a Nairobi area high school, 2 of them that we've selected, and we do our programs on the weekends and on summer breaks, innovation sling and things. And we have started coding with our innovation program. I've started coding with the kids because the Silicon Savannah, kind of like Silicon Valley, is a huge burgeoning industry in Kenya where we think if these kids are going to be entrepreneurs, this is really a great place to start, is understanding how digital business works. So yeah, basically it's just been a handful of years. I mean, we're going on 6 or 7 now, but our students are no longer the vulnerable kids who started with us. This is Grace in grade 4 and Grace in grade 8. It's amazing how quickly they're transforming into these godly, innovative leaders. And the future is still very much being written, but we're positive that God's faithfulness is leading the way. We're continuing to watch our kids grow and learn and change. And they're really, it's been incredible to watch this holistic approach to leadership transformation change their lives. To summarize what we do, basically we provide a residential program. So in Kenya, most boarding schools run like a dorm. You have a dorm master, dorm mistress, and about 50 plus kids, sometimes 100 plus kids in the dorm. We run family style. So our residential program runs like a home. There's a husband and wife team over about 24, 25 kids with a bunch of interns that act like big brothers and sisters. And Paul, it's very much what you saw us experience with the choir, very family oriented. And within that home life program, we offer trauma counseling and group counseling. As the kids grow, it just helps them process some of the things they've experienced. Our spiritual program is guiding them towards practical faith. There's a lot of biblical knowledge in Kenya, but it's hard to make that flesh out into a practical living faith. So we focus a lot on the spiritual practices, or what you might call the spiritual disciplines, that are very practical. And then our academic program focuses on critical thinking rather than lectures. So it's all about engagement. Luckily, Kenya is unveiling a new curriculum nationally that It's a lot more in line with what we want to do, but we still think our teaching strategies are offering a unique spin on that engages the student more. And our kind of crown is our innovation program. And this is where we're teaching business, leadership skills, entrepreneurial skill sets, and hard skills like coding, financing, money, even to 4th and 5th graders. Our 8th graders is a stock market. What do you call it? Stock market. Oh, it's the afternoon. My brain's dead. Basically, simulation, stock market simulation, which is kind of wild when you see what their peers may be learning or experiencing in the community. It's pretty fun to see what kind of leaders that they're going to become. Wow, I got through all that really fast, and I might have just shared too much, but I have a lot I want to talk about when it comes to you guys, but I want to answer any questions you have first about that journey or the story. And it's okay if you don't have questions.
So like in the residence halls and stuff, do you have, it's like Kenyan leaders that are with the kids, like, or is it Americans or?
So our staff in Kenya is entirely Kenyan. We would love to have some residential US staff members, but currently we don't have the facilities. There was an entire year where our, basically our creative arts teacher was American, and I loved having her there. But right now we have 25 Kenyan staff. Between the residential program, the innovation program, bookkeeper, procurement is a whole role, takes a whole person just to go shopping for groceries, basically. Transportation, security, all of that, but they're all Kenyan.
And then talk a little bit about the trips that you do bring in and the internships that you do have.
Yeah, so we definitely take trips. They of course slowed down some over 2020 and 2021, but we typically take 4 to 6 teams a year. We call them relation trips. They're not service trips. We definitely don't want to do jobs that Kenyans could do if there's a 42% unemployment rate. So what we tell our travelers is that the value you bring is being who you are and sharing your experiences with the kids. If kids are going to become entrepreneurs, they need a bank of ideas to pull from. And your idea banks are being invested in from the moment you're born. But for most of our kids, they've lived in the same 10 square miles their whole life and seen the same solution. So what we try to do with our teams is expose them to ideas in the rest of the world. And so we'll have what we call studios, where every team member teaches whatever they want to teach them for 30 minutes. It can be photography, it may be how to make a wallet out of duct tape, it may be swing dancing. We've done airplane models. I mean, it's just showing them ideas that are out there. And then we'll do cultural experiences where we just expose them to cultures from around the world. We're a very global society, so we're very used to lots of different cultures coming into our day-to-day, but that's not necessarily true for the Kenyans. And so we have taught them how to eat with chopsticks, and we had a team teach them. We had a Hawaiian descent individual who is very connected to his Polynesian culture. So we taught them the hula and the haka, and we gave them leis. And so just expanding them to ideas so that when they try to create solutions, they have a big idea bank to pull from. And just being encouragers, telling them we believe in them and that they can make a difference in the world. So that's really the theme of our trips. They're normally about 10 days long. Our internships have been on again, off again, but we're actually currently rebuilding them. My goal is one day to have several American interns on campus. Right now, all of our interns are Kenyan. So Kenyan college students who have graduated and are trying to get a job experience before they look. A lot of times we end up hiring them after a year, teacher intern, then suddenly we need a new teacher, he gets upgraded, promoted. But we have several internships we're developing now on the US side, and my hope would be to at least have a social media intern that's American in Kenya, if not also like a teaching intern. The arts especially is something that's kind of hard to find a teacher who specializes in any of the arts or art appreciation. And since Kenya is rolling out an art appreciation course for all their elementary kids, we'd love to fill that with internships over time.
Business side look like on you're in the US and you're like doing all of the management stuff? What does that look like?
The business side of the job. So legally, we're 2 separate entities. We have the Kenyan entity, which is called an NGO, non-government organization, and the US entity, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. And My role is to do most of the fundraising and partnership building and to make sure that we're staying in compliance on both sides. But Kenya has a whole set of its own governmental compliance. We do our taxes with the IRS, they do theirs with the KRA. And so I kind of oversee both, but there's a lot of leadership on that side that's also navigating that. We have boards over both entities that are in communication with one another. So really, my role is keeping everyone in step with one another. I'm kind of the rubber band that holds together all of the teams of horses. And some years it feels like they're all running in separate directions and I'm going to snap. And some years, like this one, it feels like we're all getting in sync and we're getting very clear. I have found that my role as a leader is more so to put guardrails in place to keep all those teams of horses heading in the same direction and playing their part so that they can benefit from each other's expertise. I don't know if I answered that question the way you exactly. Is there a follow-up question or did I get close to what you were asking?
That's what I just was curious how the whole everything functions together. So.
Yeah, one of these days I'll show you I could show you a really fleshed out org chart, but basically the US board is over me and then I am sitting on the Kenya board and together those three entities create our strategic plans and these two kind of work with each other. Legally, the US entity is a granting organization and the Kenya entity is the program organization. So they create programmatic needs and request funds from the US organization. Operationally, it's a little bit different because obviously all of our values and goals are set in sync. But they basically every month and year will request funds from the US entity and we work together to make sure we're raising what they need as we grow. All right. Interrupt me if you have questions. I'm gonna plow ahead. Remind me, Paul, what time the class ends? It's 1:40.
I think we end at 2, but I don't know if anybody is on their way in.
Okay.
After, so we may be.
No, that's great.
They don't kick us out.
I think that'll be more than enough time, but I just want to make sure that you guys have enough time for questions. So one of the things that you asked me to talk about is the biggest cultural differences. And I would say one of the biggest differences that I've interfaced is the 3 different kinds of culture. And if you guys have talked about this and you're like, wow, Christy, this is like international relations 101. I'm not going to dive deep into it, but if you haven't heard about it, this is a great book, The 3D Gospel. It's really phenomenal. And it basically talks about the 3 different cultures. There's a right, wrong culture, honor, shame culture, fear, power culture. Can any of you guess which one we are?
Right, wrong, yeah.
Yeah, right, wrong. So especially when it comes to biblical things, right? We were guilty and then things happened in which we were made innocent, right? We are very right, wrong. Kenya falls mostly into the honor, shame culture, but fear, power is a culture that's very common in tribal societies. And I would say that I've seen a blend of that in Kenya as well on a certain level. So honor, shame is like we were in a place of honor, but our sin has reduced us to a place of shame and we need someone to restore our honor. Fear, power is there is this powerful force of mystery that we don't understand and we need to fear it or we need to gain power, right? So there's that constant power play. And I've seen that at play so many times in all of the conversations, not just about the gospel, which is where I originally saw these, but in any of the conversations that I have, it's just the number of times that I'm like, but I'm right. But the way in which I go about being right or wrong, like it doesn't matter. I'm trying to think of an example. Like an issue will come up and I'm like, but this is the right thing to do and you are wrong. But they're going to want to resolve it totally differently because it's more about honor and shame for them. A very simple thing, Paul, I know this has happened to you, is like when you ask instructions in Kenya, like I need directions, I need to find point A. If you're asking someone who doesn't know you very well, there's a good chance they're going to straight up lie to you in order to make sure they don't feel ashamed that they don't know and they honor you with an answer. It does not matter that it is the complete wrong direction. That has happened to me so many times. I've learned to ask like 5 people, like just get a tally, right? Like because you just really never know. And it's like that with most things that you can ask people. There's just such a desire to honor you and to not shame themselves that sometimes misinformation happens a lot. Another big culture is what I call one pocket versus two pocket. I'll be honest with my staff, I have not experienced this and I'm so grateful. But we are a two pocket finance society. We have a pocket for our personal money and a pocket for the money that's entrusted to us by others, whether it's our position in a company or the things that we're allowed to control. We help our friends and our personal needs through this pocket, and then this pocket is going towards all the things that we are professionally responsible for. But most of Africa is a one pocket society. So when all the money goes into one pocket, it is the funds that are available to them, and of course needs are very pressing. And so if brother-in-law comes and says, I need help with this medical bill, and you have all of your money in one pocket, what do you think tends to happen, right? Is that sometimes funds that were entrusted to someone for a professional purpose can sometimes get used for a non-professional purpose. There's a great book called African Friends and Money Matters that digs into that a lot, if you're interested in that. I will say Nairobi is not as common because they're a very westernized city. So a lot of Western perspectives of finances are found there. And then of course, y'all know all this one, but the biggest one is a warm culture versus cold culture. So we are a cold culture. Kenya, along with dozens of other countries, is a warm culture. And we are very time focused. They are very event focused. They're all about inclusion. We're about privacy. They will always put people before the task, and cold cultures typically put tasks before people. Their communication is very indirect, and our communication is very direct. Even as Americans, we're like offensively direct most of the time. They have a very group identity, whereas of course we emphasize individualism, and they're very spontaneous hospitality, whereas we are a very structured hospitality culture. And I could literally give dozens of examples for each of these. One of the things I've had to learn the most over the last 7 to 10 years is just how to be less direct, how to ask more questions than giving an opinion, how to make sure, and this has taken me, I'm very much a task person. I'm a driver. I get things done. In fact, the Kenyan name they gave me, it's Nyawira, which means she who works really hard. And they will just always put the person in front of them first, right? Just always. And then we really value our privacy and space, but they're all about including everyone. Whenever you ask for prayer requests, they're always going to give you a community-based prayer request. They're never going to say, pray for my mom or dad, or pray, it's always like, even if they want to ask for good grades, they're like, pray that my class gets good grades in school. They rarely will say, I would like to get good grades so I can do well, and it's a shifting thing. It's not like these rules are not 100% standard, but if you want to learn more about how to be culturally relevant in a different culture, digging into this concept is going to be the most helpful thing you can do, because this applies to not just, it's Central America. There's dozens and dozens of countries that are warm culture, as opposed to mostly European and American, US culture, Canadian culture, that's more of a colder culture. So, any questions about cultural differences? My little tidbits of knowledge. It's amazing how you can work so hard just to get a couple of slides of hints towards things. Okay, well, the other thing that Paul asked me to talk about is living on mission. And this is where suddenly just buckets and buckets of things that I've experienced came out. So I don't want to run long, but I just do want to cover this. I would say one of the biggest things you can do to live on mission is to know yourself. Know your personality type. Have y'all taken Myers-Briggs? Do y'all know what that is, or the MBTI? Can you tell me what your personality types are? Do you remember the letters? Okay.
Oh, I don't remember, something about outgoing and stuff like that. I don't know.
Well, it helps a lot. Are you big picture or detailed? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Knowing yourself will help a lot. Knowing your motivation, this would be temperament tests, right? Or in some cases, the Enneagram, if y'all have taken the Enneagram. So like temperament, what has been a really big thing, there's basically 4 significant motivators to temperament. You either desire peace, order, progress, or fun and adventure, or some combination of the 2. And what motivates you is going to determine what demotivates you. So knowing that about yourself is super helpful. To know your strengths and weaknesses. Are you good at money? Are you good at storytelling? Are you that compassionate helper who's going to show up and serve, etc.? And even knowing your family of origin. Your family of origin knowledge is going to inform your journey more than you could ever imagine, and probably influences your choices to go into international work or ministry more than you think. God can use it, I promise you. It can be used. But it would probably surprise you the amount of time that we're often looking for the purpose or value or belonging that we didn't get from our family of origin when we head into nonprofit work or ministry. And then knowing your leadership style, right? Are you a consensus leader? Are you a direct cold culture leader, right? Knowing yourself and owning that is really important. And then to let that knowledge inform your choices and give you confidence about where you fit in a team, right? It's so important with cross-cultural nonprofit work, period, but cross-cultural work. It will just help you so much to know yourself. Another, like this, I cannot emphasize this slide enough, is just to get practical. Take a course in finance. And I'm so happy to hear that you are like an accounting major. I think that so many people going into nonprofit are very faith-based, very compassionate. They don't tend to be data-driven. And it's like, I am amazed that I got through 4 years of college heading into ministry and full-time work, and they never required like a finance course. Like, you need to know how to use QuickBooks, how to read a P&L, how to create a budget, how to use an active forecast tool. These are going to help you make decisions, knowing how big your risk is or how big this leap of faith is that you're about to take. It's going to hold your nationals accountable to good funding practices, which increase trust. Like, knowing finances and how 990s, which is the tax process for nonprofits, work is really important. Practice public speaking. No matter what organization you're going into, you're going to have to fundraise, whether it's just your organization asking you to repost something, or in many cases, some nonprofits require you to raise your salary or raise funds for a project, or even just knowing your elevator pitch. If you're uncomfortable speaking in public, it's just so helpful. Maybe if data or serving is your strength, this could be really uncomfortable, but it's going to be necessary when you're going into nonprofit work. And so, it's just important to practice public speaking. If you think you're going to lead, and even if you're not, write a sample business plan, a strategic plan, know what a ministry brief looks like. This is to counteract, the fact that most people drawn into compassionate international work are not typically data driven, because often it is very faith driven, but you still need data to inform your choices. It's going to deepen people's trust in you. It's going to show that you've thought it through, not just felt it through, which deepens trust in the people that you're working with. And then if you don't think you're going to be doing this on your own, if you think you're going to be working with an organization, ask them what their strategic plan is. What is their funding model, their business model? How long is their financial runway? Basically, like, how often in the year are they worried that they're not going to be able to pay you? Because it would shock you the size of organizations that only have a 3 or 4 month runway and are having to continuously raise funds throughout the year. And that urgency and scarcity is going to put pressure on you as an employee that you did not foresee, because your values align with this mission and it's wonderful, but then suddenly you're expected to do things because they aren't financially stable or don't have a plan and they're just kind of winging it. It's just important to know what that kind of stuff looks like. And then consider your for-profit skills. These will help you and your organization, especially if you have to fundraise. Like, there's this guy I work with regularly, actually. He is a missionary in northern Kenya. He came from Marietta, Georgia, which is like 30 minutes from here. And he has this incredible skill set as a videographer, but he refuses to use it as a way to fundraise. Or when he first moved to Kenya, he was like, I'll use it to help organizations. But I was like, do you realize that I could pay you a fraction of what I would have to pay someone else to help me tell Canopy's story? And it could be a part of your funding model, right? Like, I know you want to focus on a certain work, but if you budget time in your missionary schedule to use your for-profit skills to aid either your organization by saving them money or to help yourself by making money instead of just having to raise it, it's so helpful. And that could look different for each of you. Maybe it's helping someone do their books or doing their tax returns or whatever you're thinking of in accounting. I don't know what your for-profit interests are, but what are the things you can actually do to make money that could either help what you're going to do, or that would help you make money so you're less, having to worry less about fundraising. Another big area for living on mission is self-care and soul care. So I don't know if y'all are dating, engaged, on your way to be married. I was single and ended up being single for a very long time. I met my husband in my late 30s. So I didn't know this, but I ended up spending almost all of my 20s and 30s single and in ministry. And I was pretty committed to my friend circle. But what I wish I had known is that friend circle for me represented the things that a spouse represents to other people. And churches and ministries tend to give a lot of room for someone to dedicate time to their spouse. But if you're just going to hang out with friends, there's not quite as much. They want you to work on this project and you're single and you've got the time. And so you got extra responsibilities, but your devotion to your single family is going to be really important to staying balanced. Prioritizing them sometimes over your work needs is just super important for you to be the kind of person who can bring a lot to the role, not just a task. Make space to rest and recharge, and make sure that you know how you recharge. For me, it's a quiet morning. If water and sunlight are there, that's awesome. A good kayaking trip. And even then, that's all like really hard for me to prioritize, right? For you, it might be finding a big party to go to at the end of the day, or a group of friends, whatever it is that helps you recharge, and make sure you make space for it. I'm gonna sound like an old fogey here, but like, take time away from social media. And this is just gonna be super important. If you're truly gonna have margin to care about the people you're serving, you have to make space for it. Social media is amazing, right? Like, it connects you to people, it helps you fundraise, it helps you tell your story, but it also fills your heart and mind with dozens, if not hundreds of stories of people who fill your head, right? We were not created to carry that many stories, right? It's like inviting, hundreds of people into your living room every night to tell you 10 to 30 seconds of their day. And like, if you're truly going to care about the people you're serving, filling your heart with that many other stories just gives you less space for the people that you're serving. And so it's important. Maybe, delete social media during the week and only download it on the weekends, or vice versa. Make sure you're creating space for the stories of the people that you really care about, so that you have the emotional energy to care about them. Set good boundaries. It's pretty self-explanatory with work-life balance. Work on a team that values you. I was somehow really drawn to teams that were all about like getting it done, but I'm the biggest feeler dreamer you have ever met. And I just regularly struggled to figure out how to create boundaries to say, I'm a dreamer and I'm not always going to produce, but I was also really good at producing. And so I just kept finding people who would want me to produce instead of being the dreamer that I am, and the kind of like the person who needs a lot of space to create. So finding that if you're a feeler, creative, that they value that, even if they expect you to produce, or if you're a producer, that they value that and don't expect you to create, like, it's like whatever the balance is, make sure your team values who you are. And then, girls, I could talk about this all day long. Save, okay? Save. Come up with your personal finances. I would never have told you in my 20s that I was still going to be working nonprofit in my 40s. And I was just that person. And you have this joy of being able to, your 20s are when you get to work at a job you hate in order to make money, or work at a job you love and not make any money. Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing in your 20s. But if that 5 or 6 years turns into a lifetime of working at a nonprofit, you could easily find yourself in your 40s without retirement, without savings, right? Because you worked for your passion instead of for an income. No matter how little you're making, please save for emergency purposes, for retirement, because what will happen over time is, if you're not careful, you will not be able to sustain that journey. The stresses of not being able to provide if singleness lasts longer for you than you thought, and you don't have like a team to work towards finances, it's just really easy for you not to have what you need later in life, and it starts to limit your options. So even if you're saving $10 a month, $50 a month to put towards your future so that you can continue in this thing you love, make sure you do it, because the choices get really hard really fast if you're not taking care of yourself. Okay. And then lastly, I talked about take advantage of your singleness to explore. I was single for a long time, and I'm really glad that I had all that freedom, but you don't always, it is just true. As you become more and more rooted in life, you have less chance to explore things. It's a little bit riskier. So take advantage of your early years out of college or while you're single to explore, find a mentor or model, identify organizations that you admire and figure out why you admire that. That'll inform yourself and your own journey. And then don't start something if you can avoid it. Do not start your own nonprofit if you possibly can, because it has to be a calling. It has to be something so deep in you. The number of times you will question it, the number of times you'll be unsure will be so often that if you didn't know that you turned over every stone to make sure you couldn't do what you love with someone else who's taking care of everything, what'll end up happening is you'll end up quitting, like most nonprofit leaders do. And the story that it will tell internationally is that you're yet another American who doesn't see it through. And so like, you just make sure that just really turn over every rock. Is there anyone out there doing what you wish you could do? Because what they're going to do for you is take care of the business. They're going to take care of the fundraising, right? Like, find an organization. And if you can't, then go start one, and you'll know in your gut that you were meant to do it, but it's really hard. So try to find someone else doing it before you launch out and start something on your own. So those are my clips. If you want to get involved with Canopy Life, you can always share our story. We're posting all the time to social media. You're welcome to take a trip with us. We have a way to sponsor children and encourage them on their journey. And if you're interested in internship, like I said, we're currently building our summer 2022 and the whole year of 2023 program. So if you're interested, just send me an email or text me, and we'll make sure that you guys are in the system when we get ready to launch those job descriptions. Did I make the buzzer? Oh God, I went over. I'm sorry.
Bethany, when you pause that recording.
Yeah.